Mortis Maledictum is a cosmic dark fantasy story, and as such may contain content not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Now, enjoy the show.
Here you are again, prepared to turn the page. You know the risk, and know the danger. Let us begin.
What news do you carry, Quinn O'Connell?
Text flowed across the page of the Archivist's book in a smooth script. I didn't carry the book with me when I went to Niger. It would have been irredeemable if Anansi or any minion of the Mortis got a hold of it. Instead, I left it in an anonymous storage locker in my apartment in Edinburgh. Call me paranoid, but if Anansi wanted to know where I lived, he could have figured it out easier than I did at finding one of his rifts. I spent the next few hours relaying all that I had seen, knew, and learned to the archivists from my trip into the desert. They took an especially keen interest in my view from outside reality, and the connection I had made with Anansi.
You were brave to enter the Mortis' realm, Quinn O'Connell. We are sure that if your god still lived, they would be proud of you.
Falling through the rift had everything to do with bad luck, and nothing to do with bravery. But I didn't bother correcting them. Even though all of our conversations were through written words on a page, I never felt alone when I read them. But I did, then. The book went strangely still. I heard the clock ticking away on my wall for a minute, and then 2. 5 minutes finally passed before the book moved and text scrawled across its page again.
We must speak with you face to face,
is all it said. I didn't know what to make of that, and I didn't have any way of accomplishing their request. Never let it be said that archivists are powerless. They reached out through the space between worlds and, with a flick of a page, transported me out of my apartment and into the cavernous home of my now-deceased guide. I still held my tome in my hands and looked down at it in awe.
Enter the pool.
Carefully placing it on the nearby table, I stepped towards the dark waters in the center of the room. It was ice cold, but I only felt it for a moment. In the next, I floated through a space without light or gravity. After a second of panic, I fell out of the suspension into what seemed to be a hall of infinite length and breadth, its ceiling held aloft with great stone pillars. There was a soft yellow light coming from a place nearby. When I approached it, I saw a table with 13 chairs. Seated in each was the archivist. Each looked identical, and each held a fountain pen in their right hand, hovering over a book on the table. There was one empty chair. I felt out of place as I looked, wearing a brown scuffed leather jacket and 3 days of stubble. The gathered beings sat with straight backs in their sleek black cloaks, and their beaked faces all looked at me with what I guessed was a sort of expectation.
We have discussed your findings.
I gulped and pulled out the single empty chair to sit.
Okay, and? We require more data.
This time their voices rang in a cacophony with millions more who stood just outside of the light where I had not noticed them before. I pulled myself closer to the table and found a book and pen awaiting me. It felt strange talking to them instead of writing, but even as the idea formed in my mind, I looked down at the book and saw my thoughts written out on the page in my own hand. I gulped again. All right, let me start over. I don't know how long we sat in conference, nor how many times I went over the details of my trip to close the rift, but the Archivists were incessant with their questions and patient with me. Once I had satisfied them, we made a plan. The purpose of the Malice Bastion was to keep reality intact and stop anything from crossing the boundary between worlds. Few times in all of history had anyone made it across while a living entity held the mantle. It was usually through deaths of the Melusai that interchanges happened, as it did with the witch Leia, and the book which I knew as Tales Beyond Calais. There were other times as well, but mostly the barrier held and the Malice Bastion defended it. I didn't have the strength to keep the barrier, nor the desire. I needed help. There were countless beings of unimaginable power whom Anansi had slain over the centuries that could help me, if only they had yet lived. But they did live in other worlds. In those other realities, the tiniest changes which the Archivists introduced themselves at the beginning of all time gave way to wildly varying results. The fluctuations had made some planes less hospitable than mine, and some of those powerful beings agreed to come to my aid. That was why I stood in Grundir's interstitial plane with an army of cryptids, gods, and horrors in front of me. With the Grundir dead, none had bothered to close the doors. It gave me a way out of the cave and a place to meet. The interstitial plane expanded and contracted as it needed to accommodate the varying size of its audience. The only way for us to combat Anansi, even with an army, would be if we cut him off from the Mortis' power. All the gathered creatures knew this already. The Archivists had spread the word as soon as we set the plan in motion. Everyone here knew it would probably be a one-way trip, and may cause utter failure and their death. You're going to trap the spider in our reality.
How do you intend to do such a thing?
Asked a dark-skinned Chilean woman wearing a Mapuche-styled head covering. I couldn't place her, but that meant little. There were so many beings here I knew nothing about. We have to close every single rift in the world simultaneously. I can't be in all those places at the same time, and even if I could, I don't have the power to close the rifts before Anansi opened others. That's why I need your help. Each of the assembled beasts had arrived with their very own sets of jade weapons, and I told them how they could use them to stitch the rifts back together.
If we have to close every rift, what about this place?
This plane is a pocket within our reality. Grundir constructed it as the center of reality. The portals here open up and out into the real world. It is deeper and does not connect with the Mortis.
The tall figure in the back explained. The crowd parted, and it moved up to where I stood. It bowed its head ever so slightly.
Greetings, Quinn O'Connell.
You're the jailer. I thought you had to protect the souls in your forge.
My forge has long since emptied. The crucible completed, and the souls gave themselves back the honor. I am now just a Revenant. I am here to help you with this worthy challenge.
Surveying the crowd of beings around me, I saw confusion and disgust on most of their expressions. They understood much in their long lives, but kindness and justice had not survived with them. These monsters came from hard worlds, and they came for the slim chance of escape and survival. They all thought whatever they were leaving behind was worse. The Revenant came to help and brought knowledge as its weapon. Thank you, Revenant. It bowed its head to me again, but said nothing. Everyone here entered this world through the pool in the Archivist's home. You cannot return to your worlds once we begin. Anansi is using rifts as anchor points between existence, and we must close them all. That includes the Archivist's pool. I will freeze it when we begin our assault. With grim, determined expressions, each entity chose the rift they would close, and left the Grundir's plane. Eventually, the only remaining one was the Revenant.
Do not worry, Quinn O'Connell. They will close their rifts and locate the spider.
I'm not worried about that. You weren't here when it happened. I pointed to the room with the Ipoluvic's remains. All these beings came in here, and with a small amount of will, cleansed this place. There isn't a fragment left, but I could see it. I could see all the bodies, bloody and lifeless, covering the floor. I can see it, even now. How can we stand against such a reckless power? The Revenant sighed and put a hand on my shoulder.
Quinn O'Connell. I came to this world to help. I am not a jailer of souls anymore, but I could not help but see yours bare when I laid eyes on you. You will do the right thing, and I have a power all these others have forgotten or never learned. I have faith in you.
I would love to say the plan went off without a hitch, but in truth, I did not know. I wasn't there while the monsters flew out to save the world. The Revenant and I returned to the cave, and together we froze the pond. It snapped the link between our world and the pillared room outside it. Lifting his scythe from the surface of the ice, small crystals stuck to the dull iron of the blade, brushed them away with a hand. I relied on the Archivists, and even though I still held the tome, I felt cut off from them. If the battle with Anansi went poorly, we could never reopen that portal or risk the Mortis' power returning. I didn't know what its limits were, but I would not risk that it could resurrect the damn spider just because I felt a little trepidation about closing the portal.
We should join the others, Quinn O'Connell.
I nodded. Yes, let's go find them. The pair of us had given the creatures a head start. They knew how to find the rifts, and I knew they could close them with the jade weapons they brought. It would cut Anansi off from much of his power, and if my guess was right, we would immediately try to open a new rift to get it back. The next step was simply to get there and attack him. Since I was next to worthless in a fight, it was my job to close the rift we expected Anansi to open while the others kept him distracted. That was a tactful way of saying a bunch of them were going to die, and it would be on my head for everyone that did. The faster I got the rift closed again, the sooner the actual fight could begin. I knew it would take dozens of them to bring him down, and I prayed to my dead gods below that I had the speed and luck to finish my work before that arachnid bastard overwhelmed us. I couldn't ask for more help because it would be a sure thing Anansi wouldn't let me live a second time, even if I could somehow get out of it alive. I had just closed off the only portal which wasn't controlled by the Mortis. The Revenant seemed to have read my mind.
It will work. If you had 1/10 of the faith in yourself that I have in you, you would realize it would work. It has to.
How do you know?
Because I have seen your soul, and I know what it measures. Do you know how many I have watched over my time as jailer?
I shook my head.
Over 40,000 souls. When they completed their crucible to redeem their honor, do you know what they looked like?
I shook my head again. The Revenant smiled at me.
They looked like yours. That is why I have faith, Quinn O'Connell.
We stepped back through the door into Grundy's lair together to wait for the news. Time seemed forever on hold there, in that place. But eventually, Unhceglia slithered through the archway. Within a blink, she changed from a massive anaconda into a humanoid form. She was naked and brown diamond-patterned scales covered her skin.
The island dwellers have found the spider. He's in New Zealand, attempting to open more rifts.
She hissed through her still forked tongue.
Let's go then,
I said, rising to start towards the archway. The Revenant put up a hand to stop me.
What's wrong?
Instead of answering me, the Revenant looked to Unhceglia.
Have you closed all the others?
The Mother of Monsters looked irritated, but she answered the question.
Not yet. Anansi opened a rift in a Pacific island chain that is particularly hard to reach. The Oilifeist assured me she would close it within the next few moments.
If he still has access to the Mortis, why did Anansi open another rift?
I asked, picking up on the Revenant's line of thought. Unhceglia hissed at the two of us.
What does it matter?
It matters. The why always matters.
I will not sit here to be questioned by a mortal.
her form stretched and distorted between snake and woman. The Revenant stepped in front of me.
You will respect the Malice Bastion regardless of its chosen champion,
he thundered back, and the Mother of Monsters shrank from the violence in the Revenant's voice. Then he quieted his tone, gave Unhceglia a small smile.
I apologize. It is Quinn O'Connell's decision. It is his will to defend. Therefore, he needed all the information you have.
It is not only his world.
Venom flew from her human lips like spittle and ate away at the stone where it landed.
We do not know. I dislike admitting ignorance, Revenant. However, there are tremors in the streams of energy. They are close to fraying. This world does not have long to live if we cannot kill Anansi. It is my home now, too, for however long that is. I would prefer to stay here beyond today. If you two are both done questioning me.
She paused, chest heaving.
Then we should go. New Zealand will be a battlefield before we arrive, at this rate.
Anansi was escalating his operations. I knew he was ripping open rifts faster than before, and after relaying this information into the Archivist's tome, we theorized it was to destabilize the barrier for the Mortis. The tome agreed there wasn't much time left, but without being present on our plane, there was no way for them to determine how long we had left. I didn't want to bring the book with me and risk Anansi capturing or destroying it, but I couldn't bring myself to leave behind its advice. I didn't know if I would need it, but this battle was a now or never kind of fight. With everything going on, I'd rather have it and not need it than the other way around. Putting the tome in a small leather bag over my shoulder, Unhceglia, the Revenant, and I stepped back under the archway and out into the bright light of an idyllic grassy bowl in New Zealand where my little army of monsters sat arrayed against waves of smoky minions and one nasty spider. I saw the rift, laying big and bold and floating behind nearly 1,000 hulking shapes. More were filing out every second, but these minions did not look like the ones I had ever seen. These arrayed themselves in straight rows and held weapons. These minions had intelligence. They weren't mindless, hulking brutes. From somewhere near the back, a horn blast sounded, and all the minions charged forward as one unit. It was a spectacular display, and a terrifying one. The entities on my side closed up their defenses, and didn't even flinch as the Dark Horde surged upon them. The green glass of jade reflected sunlight from a dozen places along the battle line.
How am I supposed to get across?
My breath coming out in barely more than a whisper. Without the ability to fly, I had no way of making it to the rift, and I couldn't go around the battlefield in time unless I had a vehicle, which I didn't.
There isn't anything else for it, Quinn O'Connell. Let us find a weak point and attack.
With a small wave, his iron scythe blade transmuted into shining jade.
Stay behind me.
I did just that, and he waded into the fray. Our army parted for him. Once we emerged in the front, I didn't have the time to appreciate the skill the Revenant showed with each move of his scythe. The minions swarmed around him and came for me. He did well at keeping my front safe, and we kept walking forwards thanks to the scythe opening up a way with its wide slashes. One humanoid minion dove at me from the left and caught my wrist in its vice-like grip. It tried to pull me out from the Revenant's whirling defense. I fell, and that would have been the end if the ground hadn't suddenly churned like a wave of water, knocking every member of both armies to the ground. The Olafeist emerged from the grassy turf. The serpent didn't care that it had left its watery domain. Its strength simply pummeled into the opposing army. With one massive slam, it laid over on its side, crushing 100 minions in a single stroke. Dozens more staggered to their feet, along with our congregation of monstrosities. But as we felled the minions on the ground, they left their comrades there to die. Instead, as one, they turned their attention to the Olafeist, leaping atop it as it recovered for a second slam to the Mortis's lines. I spotted Anansi then. He shot a web onto the side of the great serpent, and when it leveraged itself up, it unknowingly pulled the spider up with it. Anansi landed on its side and crawled up its leg. He had found a real danger for his army and was moving directly to get rid of it. While the Olapheist distracted him, the Revenant and I made our way through the Mortis' lines. The great sea serpent slammed the ground on its side again, knocking me prone and murdering countless scores of smoky shapes. This time, however, they were ready for it. Minions leapt with abandon onto the serpent, while Anansi continued crawling up towards the Olapheist's head. I knew the serpent didn't have long, and prayed to my dead gods its distraction would be enough. I stabbed a minion through its empty eye socket and slashed another across its belly. Smoke poured through the wounds and the monster dissolved in front of me. I didn't stop moving and sprinted through its remains as it dissipated. The Revenant made it through to the other side of the battle lines. I caught up a moment later and immediately set to work on stitching the rift closed. The serpent let loose a call that shook the bedrock. It was the sound of a tornado in a freight train. It was passion and energy and heat. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Even the enemy ceased their attacks, and everyone paid homage to the passing of the great serpent, felled with a venomous bite near its neck. Anansi leapt free as the serpent fell towards the ground one last time, growing in size as the Olapheist died. The moment ended, and I resumed my work. Stitching furiously, I tried to block out the sounds of the surrounding fighting, as I did in the desert only too recently. The cryptid army I had assembled knew the benefit of using the jade weapons. A single solid stroke is all it took to kill a minion, but they outnumbered us by an order of magnitude. Worse than that, no one could stand toe-to-toe with their general. Anansi was just too strong, too fast, and too impenetrable. I had to close the rift. A minion wearing the shape of a great lion leaped at my back, claws flashing until the Revenant caught it mid-flight. His blade sliced clean through the lion, cutting it in two at the waist. That opening gave me time to react, and I spun with my daggers raised. This time, a flying drake raced under the Revenant's backswing and bit down hard on its shoulder. I raced forward and stabbed my daggers into the drake's spine, and its flapping wings stopped. It fell out of the air, its jaws loosening their grip on the Revenant's shoulder. The stroke ripped the life from the thing. But the brimstone bite had already done its work, scorching and puncturing the Revenant's being. If the rumors were true, the bite of a drake would cause an instant fever, dizziness, and vertigo. If left untreated, it would escalate from there. I didn't know how much of that was true and how much was rumor, nor did I know if the Revenant would even be susceptible to its vile bite. But it didn't matter. With his movements hampered, the enemy descended en masse. He did well and killed more than I could count. I helped where I could, and sliced through several monstrous beasts, but for every second I defended the Revenant, another of my allies died on the field behind me. It was one of the hardest things I did in battle, but I turned my back on the Revenant to finish closing the rift. I heard a crunch and the soft sound of his body landing on the grass. The monsters knew they had him, and left him to die while turning themselves onto their next target. Me. I spun and cried out for help, and to my surprise, it was Unhceglia who answered me.
Keep working, mortal.
Her arms flashed out and motes of dust flew from her fingertips. The dust blinded each minion they touched. Then, without a backwards glance, the mother of monsters loosed a wail. Within the discordant note I heard another voice, and then more. She ripped the grass under her fingertips and pulled up thick clods of dirt. From these I saw movement, first small, but within a blink they grew and stood. She used her power to create a wall of monsters to protect us. With the space I needed, I finished the last stitch and closed the rift. All the minions who had birthed died. My allies outmatched and slew those few monsters whom arrived from other sources with barely a thought. There was silence then, if only for a moment or two, as Anansi realized what had happened. He immediately tried to rip open a new rift in reality, but hundreds of monsters dove atop him, ripping and clawing and biting into him. I raced back over to the Revenant, who lay panting on the ground, pierced by dozens of wounds, shimmering silver blood trickling out onto his cloak.
He doesn't have long, mortal. Leave him and help the fight against Anansi.
A grimace plain on Unhceglia's face at my concern.
What can I do?
I asked the bleeding Revenant.
I think I'm finally done. Quinn O'Connell. I hope that my soul has held its honor.
There has to be something.
There is only this fight. One thing matters. I came to help stop the Mortis Maledictum. If I can say I helped, then I can end at peace.
A crash and screaming disrupted my attention. I looked up to make sure there was no danger racing down at us from where the Revenant lay. Instead, I saw Anansi rending through scores of his opponents, dark fog covering his carapace in supernatural armor. The serrations on his legs spent the lives of my allies. That wasn't right. He should still be strong, but he shouldn't be able to use the Mortis's power. There were no more rifts open anywhere. We closed them all. I pulled the book out of my leather bag and tore it open. I scribbled as fast as I could. In less time than I had ever seen them, the Archivists responded. I was indescribably grateful for their speed.
Break one of your daggers. If there is a link, it will attract the jade.
I didn't waste a second. Every moment I didn't solve this problem, the chances of victory slipped further from our fingers. Even if we cut the link, each creature who died tilted the odds in Anansi's favor. I placed the dagger on a rock and took another small one in my hands. Raising it over my head, I hammered down on the blade. It shattered on the first strike, my mantle assisting my strength. Immediately, the jade turned into green dust and floated through the air. It hovered for a long moment before finally descending atop the Archivist's tome. The bottom fell out of my stomach. The tome was the link. It made sense. I used it to communicate across dimensions, but I had thought that somehow it was protected. The Archivists must have too. There was no physical rift where I could walk through and look for spiderwebs. It was the perfect hiding place. All Anansi had to do was find the thread from the other side of the barrier and anchor himself to it. I looked down at the book, grasping for some other way. What if I was wrong? What if there were other rifts, ones we missed? If I destroyed the book, I wouldn't get another chance. I wouldn't have a way to ask for help. This was it, and I was alone. How could I do this? Make this decision? A hand touched my shoulder. I looked up to stare into the Revenant's eyes. The sounds of the battle behind me were suddenly so far away.
I lied, Quinn O'Connell. 40,000 souls entered my crucible, but they did not leave. The Forge destroyed them. Destroyed all but one. You survived. That is why I have faith in you, Quinn O'Connell. A person's body is always different in each world, as are their circumstances. Their choices change based on a billion factors. Regardless of all that, their souls...
He trailed off, wheezing with an effort to get the next words out.
Their souls are always the same.
The Revenant died then, and I stared down at the book in my hands, ink scrawling across its open page. The Archivists demanded to know what was happening and where the link was. In my other hand, I held my one remaining jade dagger, and in the distance the sounds of the battle came back in a wave of noise. I lifted the dagger and drove it through the spine of the Archivist's book. There was a flash and an explosion threw me backwards. Everything went white. But in my blindness, I could hear Anansi screaming. The sudden loss of power had crippled him, and my few surviving allies descended again. This time, their weapons broke through his armor and pierced into the spider's heart. I walked to where it lay, shaking and its legs slowly curling upwards. When it saw me, it cackled.
You are a dead mouse. It was over before you took the field. This win is not a victory. The cracks are too many. The barrier is as thin as smoke. If but a single breath falls upon it, the rifts will open and the chain reaction will begin.
That's a lie, I said, spite hard in my voice. I lifted my ink-stained dagger and put it to Anansi's eyes.
You are finished. It is all finished. Finally.
Then I drove the jade spike into its brain. The gathered monsters shuddered with the spider's death, and all of its absorbed power flew out of it, floating above its body like a ghost. It clicked and hissed.
You have done it, Mouse. My death is the beginning. You may take all my power, and it will not be enough to stop what is coming.
Then the ghostly shroud flew into me, the same as others had done to him. I fell over backward, reeling from the strain. Mortal bodies were not meant for such energy. And I heard the voices of 1,000 beings, each vying to be heard over the cacophony. But through it all, I felt something else, a rumbling coming from without, not within my being. The lines of energy holding the barrier between reality and the Mortis were breaking. The first and final defense had fallen, just as Anansi had said, and it was me who destroyed it. Annihilation's heart beat to the sound of mighty wings.
We don't take sponsorships or ad revenue, and we fund our show solely through the generous support of our listeners like you. Help us keep this show ad-free and, as a thank you, get access to exclusive episodes by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/Mortis Maledictum or click the link in the show notes. Thank you.